Hi, everyone. I'm John Sigenthaler, and this is Al Jazeera America. Words that have ignited a firestorm.
I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation.
Spoken by presidential candidate Ben Carson, and his campaign is not backing down. Tonight, what Carson's comments say about the politics of faith, the race for president.
We ask Mr. Ben Carson to withdraw from the presidential race because he's unfit to lead.
And religious tolerance in America. In the race for the White House, religion is now front and center. Ben Carson put it there, and he wants to be the next president of the United States. What he doesn't want is for someone who is Muslim to hold that office. That's what the candidate thinks. Why would he say that, and what do the other candidates believe? We're looking at that issue tonight, along with a closer look at faith and politics. A lot of people are talking about this, and we think it's important enough to discuss. First, Carson's comments. Here's Del Walters.
I would not advocate that we put a Muslim in charge of this nation. I absolutely would not agree with that.
Dr. Ben Carson says he doesn't think Islam is consistent with the Constitution, but nevertheless would consider voting for a Muslim running for a seat on Capitol Hill.
Congress is a different story, but it depends on who that Muslim is and what their policies are.
His comments ignited a firestorm, and the Council for American Islamic Relations, or CAIR, is calling for Carson to withdraw from the race.
We ask Mr. Ben Carson to withdraw from the presidential race because he's unfit to lead.
But Carson isn't backing down. In an interview with The Hill on Sunday, he said, "I do not believe Sharia is consistent with the Constitution of this country." He was referring to Islamic law, adding, quote, "Muslims feel that their religion is very much a part of your public life and what you do as a public official, and that's inconsistent with our principles and our Constitution." His spokesperson, Doug Watts, later added, quote, "He has great respect for the Muslim community, but there is a huge gulf between the faith and practice of the Muslim faith and our Constitution and American values," end quote. Other candidates from both parties are weighing in on Carson's statements. Hillary Clinton quoting the Constitution in her tweet, adding, "Can a Muslim be president of the United States of America? In a word, yes. Now let's move on." Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz agreed, saying, "The Constitution specifies that there shall be no religious test for public office, and I am a constitutionalist." Louisiana's Governor Bobby Jindal reacted with his own criteria for a hypothetical Muslim candidate, saying that person should, quote, "respect the Judeo-Christian heritage of the United States and place his or her hand on the Bible when being sworn into office."
I want to take questions.
All of this comes in the wake of a Trump town hall meeting where incendiary remarks were made about Muslims and President Barack Obama.
Problem in this country, it's called Muslims. We know our current president is one.
Donald Trump was criticized for his handling of the comment. He was asked on CNN why he didn't do more to correct the man.
We certainly do have a problem. You have radicals that are doing things. I mean, it wasn't people from Sweden that blew up the World Trade Center.
Anti-Islamic sentiment has been on the rise since the attacks of 9/11, even though federal law enforcement authorities say tips from the Muslim community have been key to thwarting some plots threatening the U.S. But even a recent Pew poll showed that opinions about followers of Islam have not improved. When the survey asked Americans to rate their feelings toward major religious groups, Muslims came in last, rating lower than even atheist. But the latest eruption of anti-Muslim feeling from presidential candidates reflects some of the politics of the far right. Surveys show that a growing number of conservative voters believe the U.S. is losing its Judeo-Christian heritage. Del Walters, Al Jazeera, New York.
Linda Sarsour is Executive Director of the Arab American Association of New York, and Lenny McAllister is a Republican commentator. He's in Pittsburgh. Linda, let me start with you. Give me your reaction to Ben Carson.
I mean, I think it's pretty appalling to have a black American candidate for president say that a Muslim shouldn't be president. The irony is he comes from a party that already thinks the president of the United States, currently Obama, is a Muslim, and probably comes from a party that doesn't want to see Ben Carson as president. And that's just an irony for me.
Lenny, your reaction.
My reaction is that she's going a little over. I agree with her 100%. I think it's a farce that Dr. Carson would say that. I don't think that the Republican Party doesn't want to see a black man in office. I think they just don't want to see a black Democrat in the Oval Office anymore. And to be honest, I mean, we settled this 50 years ago with JFK in regards to canonical law versus the Constitution. For this to come up in 2015 after we've had the first Catholic American president, when we've had this fiasco and this controversy, it just seems to be rehashing history unnecessarily.
But in some ways it strikes me, Linda, that this has been something that's been sort of under the rug, swept under the rug for a long time. There are a lot of Americans out there, I don't know how many, maybe a few, but they believe this, just like that guy that got up and spoke at Donald Trump. So is it a good thing that this has kind of been uncovered in some ways or not?
I think that's why I think Donald Trump and Ben Carson are playing a very important role. They're exposing the racism and bigotry that exists in the United States. I mean, we are not, as an American Muslim community, we are 7 to 10 Muslim Americans in this country, 1.7 billion of us internationally. And we are facing probably the most hostile civic environment. And these two candidates are exposing what America really was created on. I mean, based on this racism and ideology, to be honest with you.
You know, I listened to the commentary today on television, Lenny, and I heard the comments about what are Muslim children going to think when they hear a discussion about, you know, a Muslim can't be a president of the United States. And it strikes me that that's exactly what was said about African Americans, right?
Ironically enough, we were just talking about this 10 years ago, where we would have never thought we'd have seen an African American be president of the United States. 2008, we saw that glass ceiling shatter. Listen, to every Muslim American child out there, you can be president of the United States. You can be a great president of the United States, regardless of your gender and regardless of your socioeconomic background. Do not let these false statements sway you from anything that you're doing in school or anything you want to do to make your life the best.
Lenny, let me just stay with this. I hear you saying this. I don't hear all those Republican candidates saying it.
Well, they're allowed to be wrong.
They're allowed to be wrong.
They're allowed to be wrong.
And to be honest with you, John, this is the problem with Islamophobia and anti-Muslim rhetoric. It's acceptable. Plain blank, it's happening and it's acceptable. When the guy got up to ask Donald Trump that question about Muslims are the problem and Obama's a Muslim, a lot of the mainstream media started focusing on the fact that why didn't he correct that Obama wasn't a Muslim? It wasn't about the fact that the guy basically called genocide or said he wanted to get rid of all Muslims in America. And we allow this to happen. Where's the leadership of the GOP? Nowhere to be found. And this is not just the presidential candidate. This happens from state senators. There are people trying to pass anti-Sharia bills. This is happening every single day in all parts of the country, and no one's standing up and saying it's wrong.
So Lenny, you have stood up and said it's wrong, but why hasn't the GOP come out stronger on this?
I mean, and let me talk very specifically from a political strategy perspective. If you're trying to get Christian conservative votes and you're Ben Carson and your poll numbers have come down and you need those Christian conservatives to do well in Iowa to continue to move forward, this is a well-timed statement. Now, do I agree with the statement? No. From a political strategy, I understand this erroneous statement. Now, with that said, I do think that there are people within the Republican Party that stand for religious freedom. That is the First Amendment, and I stand for that, and because of that, you have to be able to stand for it all the way through. Hopefully we'll hear more voices. Surprisingly enough, Ted Cruz said something to defend Muslim Americans in their faith. I think there's a way to do that and make sure that the Constitution is the #1 law of our United States, and regardless of what faith you are, we adhere to the Constitution and the freedoms it protects.
Speaking of laws, we heard Ben Carson today sort of try to split hairs and say, well, it's Sharia law. You know, the Muslims need to reject Sharia law. Is there a way out of this for Ben Carson politically? I mean, look, you're active politically. What do you think?
I think basically what Lenny's saying is that politically you can throw Muslims under the bus to win elections is basically what Lenny was saying. But what I want to say is Ted Cruz wasn't defending Muslim Americans. He was reading from the Constitution. And this is the point that we're making here. I already know what the Constitution says. But to say that any Republican candidate has actually stood up for Muslim Americans or said bigotry against Muslims is unacceptable, I haven't personally heard that yet.
What did you say, Lenny?
I said that's good enough. If you stand behind the Constitution, you say we protect religious freedom, that includes Muslim Americans who are Americans. There's nothing more that needs to be said.
Well, I mean, there's some who are elected to office in this country, maybe not the White House, but other offices. Are you surprised that Linda, that this has become such an enormous issue?
I mean, for me, to be honest with you, I don't really care what Ben Carson. But back to your point about the message this sends to Muslim children, this is airing on every single mainstream television where kids are hearing this guy who thinks he's going to be the president of the United States of America say that Muslims can't be the president of the United States of America. And that's the problem why I think this is a big deal, the psychological impact that this has on young people. And to be honest with you, I'm going to tell something to Ben Carson. I'm 35 years old, born and raised in the U.S., and I'm happy to share my birth certificate, but I can be the president of the United States of America, and that's what he has to accept.
You may be someday, Linda. It's good to see you.
Never know.
Lenny, good to see you. Look forward to a discussion about
bless.
this again. Thanks very much.
Thank you.